It was 2016, and I had just landed a new job at a small inn in a quiet coastal town. The pay wasn't great, but I desperately needed a stable office job. One of my friends, Daniel, had pulled some strings to get me in. For a few days, I trained with the owner, Mrs. Hargrove, in the mornings, and for 2 nights, Daniel showed me the ropes for the 11 p.m. The work was pretty uneventful, checking in guests and handling paperwork. Hargrove and her husband then left for a vacation, which explained the rush training I had to go through. So on my first night alone, I was a bit on edge. The office had large windows providing a clear view of the inn's grounds, and there was a monitor showing security camera feeds. Unlike most inns, this one didn't have a night window for security. Around 1 a.m., a man walked in and asked if there were any rooms available. Usually if someone seemed off, Mrs. Hargrove advised, saying we were full, but he seemed normal enough. I replied that we did have a room available. He confirmed it was just for one night, so I began the check-in process. As I worked, I noticed him swatting at the air and making spitting noises as if he were being attacked by invisible flies. I tried to ignore it and quickly completed the reservation, handing him his key. I was still fairly timid back then, dealing with a lot in my personal life, which might explain my reaction to what happened next. The man returned from his room, banging his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump. He stared at me through the glass, then cracked the door open and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" Trying to stay calm, I suggested that perhaps his key was malfunctioning and offered to give him a new one. The look in his eyes was chilling, and I felt a wave of danger. I handed him the new key and watched him head back to his room. I tried texting Daniel for help, but there was no response. He was likely asleep. Minutes later, I saw the man coming back down the stairs. Panic set in. I ran to the back office, locked the door, and grabbed the pocket knife I always carried for protection. From the office, I heard him yelling, "Hello, why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" My fear and lack of experience led me to handle the situation poorly. Instead of calling the police, I told him through the door that I was on the phone and would be out shortly. I then tried calling Daniel repeatedly, but there was still no answer. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the office. The man wasn't there. He had gone to the bathroom. From inside, I heard him muttering angrily, "Kill her." My heart pounded, but I didn't call the police. Instead, when he came out, I apologized for the trouble and offered to escort him to his room. He agreed, and I hid my knife in my sleeve, ready to defend myself if necessary. As we walked towards his room, he insisted on walking behind me. I kept glancing back, terrified he might attack. He stopped at the wrong door, but I pointed him to his room a few doors down. Relieved, I quickly returned to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a nearby town. I hesitated, but ended up confiding in him about the man. The officer agreed to keep an eye out. The following night, the man returned, but I had locked the doors and told him we were fully booked. When Mrs. Hargrove returned from vacation, I explained what had happened. She didn't seem too concerned, but I continued to work the night shift for the next year, where I encountered many other strange and unsettling situations. I worked the night shift at a busy hospital in the heart of the city. Just a few minutes ago, something strange happened, and I feel compelled to write it down while it's still fresh in my mind. This could serve as documentation in case anything more comes of it. During our orientation, we were trained to watch for potential abductors, learning to spot signs like oversized clothing, large bags, and suspicious behavior. Until tonight, I had never encountered anyone who set off those alarms. It's 2:59 a.m. now, and I've been at the front desk since my shift started at 11 p.m. As a nursing student, I handle most of the clerical work in the unit and keep an eye on the security cameras to ensure no unauthorized person gains entry. Nights are typically quiet, but tonight has been oddly unsettling, and this incident just capped it off. The neonatal intensive care unit, along with most of the second floor, is a secured unit. To gain entry, visitors have to pick up a phone that rings at the desk. Usually it's parents wanting to visit their babies or family members who are lost. After 11 p.m., things generally settle down, with the only people coming and going being housekeeping staff. One of the security cameras provides a view of the first set of doors. I was casually browsing social media when the phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting a routine call from a parent. It took me a moment to realize it was the number for the first set of doors. I picked up the phone and saw a woman in baggy clothing with a sling on her arm. I answered, and she said she was looking for her cousin, who had supposedly been brought up from the emergency department. I asked for her cousin's last name, but she mumbled something unintelligible, and I only caught part of a Latino-sounding name. Since we had no new admissions, I told her there was no one by that name in the neonatal intensive care unit. She insisted her cousin had come from the emergency department, so I directed her to labor and delivery to check there. She hesitated, then agreed and walked away. The encounter left me with an uneasy feeling, so I checked our records to see if anyone was being assessed in labor and delivery department. There were no new assessments. It crossed my mind that she might be at the wrong hospital, or worse, that she had more sinister intentions. I shrugged it off, figuring if her cousin was indeed in labor and delivery department, she would eventually find her. 5 minutes later, the same woman reappeared, still in her baggy clothes and sling. This time she was adjusting the sling with her supposedly injured arm while fumbling with something inside her oversized sweatshirt. She picked up the phone and again asked to be let in, claiming that labor and delivery department had no record of her cousin. I reiterated that she needed to contact her cousin directly and check with labor and delivery department. She became momentarily hostile, then hung up the phone. I still don't know if she was trying to gain access for some nefarious reason, but the whole encounter was deeply unsettling. To the creepy lady who seemed like a potential baby snatcher, I sincerely hope our paths never cross again. My name is Jake. I am a 6'5" guy living in the heart of New York City. I'd like to think I'm a pretty tough and intimidating guy, but some of the stuff that went on at the office building where I used to work the night shift still gives me chills to this day. The building I worked at was enormous, probably the tallest in our part of Manhattan. Until about 9 p.m., it would be quite busy, and only around 10 p.m. would we manage to usher out all the remaining workers. By midnight, all the business owners would have left. My job was to patrol the building and ensure no one was sticking around after hours. We didn't have any weapons, just a flashlight and a radio for communication. There were multiple occasions when we found the intruders hiding around, trying to break into offices after dark. Usually they were outnumbered by the three of us on shift at the time and were intimidated by me or some of the other imposing security members. One night, things got really weird for me. It was about 2 a.m., and I was standing in the middle of the empty lobby eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the building that had any light at night due to the large glass windows, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading to the maintenance rooms. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately on edge and flicked on my flashlight without hesitation. I remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating about 20 feet in front of me. As I got closer to the end of the hall, the noise grew louder until I was at the end of the hallway, where the maintenance room doors were to the left and right of me. The sound was coming from the left door. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared but confused. I yelled, "Who is in there?" The noise quickly stopped. I paused for a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear I could hear breathing, low, deep breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is Jake. I need help in the maintenance hallway. I think someone's here." There was no response. This was really strange and put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. I opened the door a tiny crack again. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't come out with your hands up, you're going to regret it tonight." He wanted that I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the maintenance room? What was the metal noise? What the heck was even happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight across the room. All the storage lockers were open, but other than that, the room was totally empty. I was completely terrified by now, definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the room, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint. This is some horror movie stuff. Then I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I spun around, basically crying at this point, and shone my flashlight on a massive man. At least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s, with matted gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty smile like a kid caught stealing cookies or something. I'm not going to lie. I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger to his mouth before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like a small metal box in his hand. It turns out he was just behind the maintenance door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so close to him and didn't even notice he could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I told my coworkers about my experience. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that.